walk through the water bath canning process. But before we do that, that's kind of like the boring part. You guys are here for the mushrooms. We all love mushrooms. So what I have here in this bowl are some different types of mushrooms, specifically from small holes. I really like them. I've used them a couple of times, and so I'm happy to use their mushrooms today. So in this batch, we have shiitake, blue oyster, royal trumpet, lion's mane. I think it's just a small amount of lion's mane in here, yellow oyster, and then we just have some basic button mushrooms. So this process is probably one of the more advanced processes because it's multiple steps. The first thing we're going to want to do is we kind of need to cook our mushrooms a little bit before we actually, put the brine with them and, jar them or put them in jars. So I have about 5.5 pounds of a variety of mushrooms. And so what I'm going to cook these mushrooms in is in my Dutch oven, which is right over here. I have about, let's see, what do I have in this? 6 tablespoons of bottled lemon juice. So I use like the organic lemon juice, 8 cups of water. And this is basically what I'm going to cook my mushrooms in. The really nice thing, if you cook it this way, is then once you're done cooking all of your mushrooms and you move them over to the pot with the brine, you're going to have a really delicious mushroom broth. So you can use that for future soups. You can do a whole lot of things. So the first thing I want to do is just go ahead and start cooking these mushrooms. So again, it's the 6 tablespoons of bottled lemon juice, not fresh squeezed, bottled lemon juice, and then 8 cups of water. So I'm just going to go ahead and put these guys in here. And I really want to bring these mushrooms up to a boil. And then I'm going to let them simmer for about 5 minutes. And then after 5 minutes, I'm going to transfer them. I'm going to strain them out, and I'm going to transfer them to my pot of brine. And once I get these all in here, I'm going to talk to you about what I use for the brine. So we're going to get all those mushrooms in there, and they're gorgeous. And then I'm just going to bring my fire up just a little bit, and I'm just going to let this come up to a boil. And then once they start boiling, I'll take the fire down and let them simmer for about 5 minutes. So in TV world, I've already completed this process. So I actually have a batch over here, that's ready to go for canning, but we'll do some other things first. So let me get that up like that. All right. So next is the brine, which is what we call the marinated part, what makes a marinated mushroom. And so we make a brine, and the brine is really like the sauce. It's the one thing that hooks people. It's the most delicious part. It's the part that has all the flavor. So these mushrooms are going to have a lot of different things. So first I have, it's 2 3/4 teaspoon of oregano, basil, and I think it's also pickling salt. So if you don't know what pickling salt is, here it is. And I'll put it in the camera, and I'll put it down here. This is one of the best salt to use if you're really into pickling. It helps keep the crunch. It helps keeps the flavor, especially if you're pickling carrots or any type of root vegetables. It really keeps that crunch to it. A lot of people don't know where you can find pickling salt. If you go to H-E-B, our main store here, and you go to the aisle with the ice cream salt, which is usually like the baking aisle, usually it sits with the ice cream salt. So I use pickling salt for most of my recipes, and of course, how much I use depends on what I'm making. So just a little bit for these marinated mushrooms. And there's my salt. I also have added about 3 tablespoons of pimentos. If you're a person who likes heat, feel free to add peppers. The one thing about pickling is It's really easy to kind of correct yourself before you can it, because you can always taste it. You can always take up the heat. If you're a person who really likes garlic, you can add a lot of garlic. You just want to make it as flavorful for you. And then I also have some shallots here. You can use onions. We having this weird thing with the red onions and being recalled. So I just like, okay, no onions. So I use shallots here, but you can use any type of onions that you would like. And what you're gonna do, you're gonna get all of these ingredients. You're gonna get another saucepan. So not the ones that you're actually cooking the mushrooms in, but a totally different saucepan. And you are going to add your shallots, your oregano and basil, pickling salt, and your pimentos. And then you're gonna add 1.5 cups of either olive oil or your favorite salad oil, canola. You may wanna use avocado. It really doesn't matter, just some type of oil, because that is the marinade. And then 2 cups of vinegar. So that is going to be your sauce. That is going to be your brine. And so as your mushrooms are cooking, you're just cooking your brine, your sauce. And then once all the mushrooms are cooked, you'll strain it off, and you will add those cooked mushrooms to your brine. And then you're gonna let that cook for about 5 minutes. So while you're doing all this, you're running around, you're like, okay, I'm making all my stuff. So how do I get it into a jar? So as we're waiting for some of this stuff to cook, I'm gonna show you guys some of the tools that I use to pickle. And then I'm happy to answer any questions, and then we'll walk through kind of jarring your items. So like I mentioned earlier, when I'm at home, I use my, what kind of vinegar? You want to use 5% white vinegar. You always want to use, for any type of pickling, you want to have something with a 5% acidity. So sometimes you're going to see recipes with rice vinegar, you're going to see all these different recipes, and that's fine. But you always want to make sure you use 5%. That helps, kill off any bacteria, anything that could possibly grow in your product. So that's a great question. Thank you. So you have this pot. You're brand new to canning. You're afraid of botulism. 5.5 pounds of mushrooms. 5.5 pounds of mushrooms, and they can be any mushrooms that you like. Whatever calls to you. I like using a variety of mushrooms. I think it's always lovely with the color. But yeah, any amount. So you're new to canning, you don't know what to do, you're afraid of botulism, but you want to try a small batch at home. This is just your regular like cooking pot. Stock. This is a stock pot. So you take it, you wash it. And then you can grab this. These are little silicone pot holders. I got these from HEB for $1. They're really inexpensive. This is really great if you don't have a canning rack. Most people are not going to have a canning rack. If you do, great. But you want to have something at the bottom of your pot that your jars can kind of sit on, so the glass from the pot is not touching the metal. Because this is water, we're going to bring this up to boil, it's going to get really hot. So glass will break if it's, touching that metal. So you want to have like a little, you want to have like a little rack or either some type of silicone thing to put your jars in, okay? So then, and I'll show you guys an example. You got your jars. So anytime you get a jar, whether it's at the store or, you're reusing a jar, you always want to make sure you wash them out well, even if they're in the package. We don't know how long they've been sitting in the store in their package. So just wash your jars really well. You can reuse jars as long as there's no cracks or chips. So if you're reusing jars, just make sure you kind of examine the jar, look at the jar, make sure it doesn't have any cracks. because the last thing you want to do is, make this beautiful product and you get ready to seal the lid to your jar and it explodes and then you're ruined. So I'm using these little wide mouth. These are about a half pint. They're the half pint wide mouth jars. And so you just want to layer your jars at the bottom. Let's see if I can do it. So basically you just want as many, usually you can probably get 4 in here, but you want them to sit on that silicone. So you don't want them touching the metal. Then what you would do is you're going to fill this up with water and just cover the tops of the jars. Okay, and so once you cover the tops of the jars with water, you can add a little bit of vinegar. I like to use white vinegar, same thing, 5%. And that I just feel a little bit better about the jars getting clean. Because this process that we're talking about here is sterilizing your jars. People often hear and they think, oh, sterilizing means using some type of alcohol. No, in the canning world, sterilizing means bringing your jars up to a boil. Usually it's about for 10 minutes. And that kind of cleans them and makes sure they're ready to actually put your product in. So once you do that, once you cover the jars with water, you put it on your stovetop and you bring it to a boil. And once they boil for about 10 minutes, those jars are ready to use. They should be clean enough, sterile enough for you to go ahead and package your product. If you are new to pickling, there's some supplies that you may want to invest in, not only the stock pot or the silicone pot holder, but also a jar lifter. So the water can get very hot. Even if you get a professional canner, the temperatures can run anywhere from 150 to 180. And you're not going to want to reach your hand into a boiling pot of water. So this little nifty tool is called a jar lifter. You can get it on Amazon. This one is actually made by Ball Canning. I have several of these. I really like them. And this just allows you to pick up the jar in and out of your pot really easily. And so it kind of keeps your hands from getting burnt. And then you're able to, kind of work with your product. There are also a couple of other tools we're going to talk about. I have this. The jars are a little bit easier to read, but this helps me, the bottom of this helps me release the air bubbles. And I'll show you an example of this once we start adding our pickled items into the jars. But you want to make sure that you release any air bubbles in your product. Because if you have bubbles in your product, when we go to seal that lid to the jar, if those bubbles are moving around as they're heating up, that can also break your jar. So you always want to make sure that you release the air bubbles. So we'll come back to this tool and I'll walk you guys through it. Funnels. So I have a metal funnel and a plastic funnel. Either one is fine. The plastic ones can handle really high temperatures. The metal ones will last forever. So these are really great. So what you would do is you would actually, right before you're about to put your product in the jar, you would put the funnel on top and then you would ladle in your product. So you definitely just ladle in. Again, this keeps your hands from getting hot and sticky or messy. So the funnels keep things kind of clean. I really like the funnels. Next you have are your rings. When you buy the jars and the packages, usually they come with lids and rings. Those are great. Rings you can reuse. That's not a problem. You just want to make sure you wash them off with soapy water. But one of the things you always want to be mindful of is as you're reusing these rings, they will begin to rust. So you're going to notice like that little copper color on them. So you definitely want to make sure if they start to rust, go ahead and toss them. You don't want to keep using them for future pickling sessions. So you just want to make sure that your rings look all nice and clean and shiny like these do. Next are the lids. So you have these lids. What is the air bubble tool called? I think it's called a bubble releaser. And if you go shopping or Target or whatever, usually these items are going to come in a whole entire kit. It's going to be rare that you're going to be able to buy just one item out of this. So you can type in pickling kit and this tool should be in there, or something that looks like this. If you don't have one and you want to try pickling, like tomorrow, you can use a chopstick, a wooden chopstick, to release the air bubbles. And I can show you guys what that looks like. The only thing you don't want to use is something metal. You don't want to use like a metal knife to release the air bubbles, because that's metal again on the glass, and you can crack your glass that way. So a chopstick or one of these little plastic air bubble releasers would work. Good question. So next is our lids. The lids are the only things you cannot reuse. Once you use them once, so once all your product is done and 4 weeks later, you open them up and you're eating your stuff, you can't reuse this for another pickling session. Of course, if you have pickles and you're opening, that's fine, but you can't use these more than once. So if you notice, I'm going to try to get as close as possible. There's like a little orange band. That's actually like an adhesive. So in the past, we used to have like a small little pot, and we would have to warm up the lids, and it would warm up this band. So once you pack all your product in, it would just seal on your jar and you would put a lid on it. In the last few years, ball canning has changed their lids. You do not have to warm up your lids anymore for them to seal. You just need to make sure you wash them with soapy water, rinse them off, and then they're ready to go. If you warm these up, you will ruin the seal. So it's just wash them with warm soapy water. And then once you pack your jars, you're good to go. And we'll walk through that as well. So these are a couple of products. So you have your jars, you have your lids, which you can't reuse after one time, something to release the air bubbles. Yes, thank you, Cecilia. Air bubbles, and then the funnel. All right. Does anyone have any questions before we go to the fun part? Yeah. Let's do it. All right. So we have been cooking our mushrooms, bringing them to a boil. And of course, this includes the lemon juice and the water, which is really great. We also have in another pot our brine, which has all the spices, the olive oil, the vinegar. And so once those mushrooms are done, you can take a strainer like I have, and you can strain the mushrooms. So strain off the juice, strain the mushrooms, and then add that to your brine that has been kind of warming up and heating. Just be mindful when you're cooking oil, when it bubbles. So kind of keep your fire pretty manageable on your brine. So once you've added all your mushrooms into your brine, you're going to cook it, like I said, for about 5 minutes. And all those wonderful spices and all those wonderful flavors are going to kind of infuse with your mushrooms. You also have your jars ready. So your jars have been boiling for 10 minutes. And if, even if your product is not done, you can turn the fire down to low and just kind of keep your jars warm. Yes, I did cut up the mushrooms before cooking. Yes. So I'm going to grab all of my jars. Using my jar lifter, you can pour out the water back into the pot, because we're gonna use the same pot to make sure our lids seal to the jar. And then I'm gonna show you guys two ways. I'm gonna grab a chopstick. So now we have our jars. So I have 4 jars here. They're pretty hot. I use my jar lifter. So the next step now is to ladle our product into the jars. So I'm just gonna bring my brine close to me and hopefully, let's see, I'll try to hold this up too, so you guys can watch it too. So we have our amazing mushrooms and our beautiful brine, which has been simmering for a while. Yes, I can definitely get you the recipe. That's not a problem. And where is, oh, here's my ladle. So now I'm going to ladle these mushrooms into the jar. And I can touch this because I'm used to the heat. So here's our jar. And then what I'm going to do, what I may do, is just go ahead and ladle those mushrooms right into the jar. And safety first, you guys, I'm so used to heat, I can do this, but you definitely want to have this on a countertop as you're pouring it in. Okay, so there's that. So as you can see some of the pimentos, you can see the mushrooms, you can see the oregano, you can see the basil. So I'm going to do that for each one of these jars. And then we can walk through how to release the air bubbles and all that fun stuff. So again, just ladling. Do I need any tasters? Yes, always. My sister is usually my taste tester, my boyfriend. So this is also an opportunity. These are always optional. If you're a person who likes peppercorn, you can add maybe 1 or 2 peppercorns to the bottom of the jar before you ladle it in. I'm a person who loves garlic. And so I'm actually going to put in some minced garlic right on top of these guys before I release the air bubbles. So again, we have the mushrooms with the vinegar. All right. So you'll notice I haven't filled the brine up to the tippy top. If you're looking at jars, let's look at this dude. You have a couple of rings. You have first, second, and then the top is the third. I usually try to fill it up right up to the second one, just because products expand when you're warming them up. So you always want to leave a little bit of head space, that's what we call it, for your product to potentially expand. So you don't want to fill it up to the very, very top. Maybe like the second ring is good. You definitely want to make sure your product is submerged. This product is super oily. So usually, if you're one of those people, like I usually wear gloves, if you're wearing gloves and doing this, you will transfer oil everywhere. So keep that in mind. That was a hard lesson for me to learn. So as I said, I love garlic and I have some minced garlic here. And this is 1/4 teaspoon of garlic. If you're a big garlic lover, you can do more. This is so you don't have to add any more lemon juice on the bottom of the jar. No, you don't have to. No, not at all. So I'm going to add my garlic here. And that's good for me. Of course, you can add more. So we have a couple of tools. So we have the plastic air bubble releaser, and then we have a chopstick. I mean, we have a wooden chopstick. None of these items are metal. So I'll start with the chopstick. So the first thing you want to do, I'll kind of hold it up, is you want to just move that chopstick around and release any bubbles. Sometimes you're going to see bubbles kind of pop up, and then sometimes you're not. It's usually a lot easier when you're packing something really tight, like if you're packing cucumbers in a jar really tight, you may see those little bubbles kind of fizz up to the top. But just because you don't see it doesn't mean that it's not there. So you always want to spend some time just moving around the edges of the jar to release any potential air bubbles. You can even throw it down the middle if you like. So that's with the chopstick. You also have this plastic tool. I'm using the end of it. Again, just moving it around the edges of the jar to release any potential air bubbles. All right. All right, so that's pretty good. Okay, that's a great question. What kind of minced garlic do I use? I use the organic Spice World minced garlic. This one comes in, I get the big plastic one, usually because I'm making like 120 jars in one pickling session. But it comes in the glass jar and it comes in a plastic jar. So either one, but it's from Spice World and it's the organic one that I really like. You can also mince your own garlic. I love my own minced garlic, but it's also really hard to mince a lot of garlic when you're making a lot of pickles in a setting. So that's an option. So the next thing I want to do is we're going to seal these lids to the jar just like this. But as I was packing them and ladling over the brine, maybe there's some olive oil that got around the mouth of my jar. So I don't want to put this lid on top until I've like cleaned off or wiped down my jars. So what I'm going to do is that water that these jars came out of with their water bath process, I'm just going to get a paper towel. And it's going to be hot, so just be mindful, paper towel, I'm going to wet it. And then I'm just going to wipe the mouth of the jars off. So any type of oil or like maybe there's some spices or some gunky stuff, I'm going to make sure that I just wipe that down. And like I said, these guys are really slippery because of the oil. All right, so I wipe those down. We pack them, we remove the air bubbles, we wipe them down. And now the next thing we need to do is put the lids on the jars. So I have washed all my lids in warm soapy water and they're ready to go. I'm going to place them right on top of my jars like this. And then I'm going to use my rings to hold that lid in place. And you don't want to tie it too tight because once these go back in the water and we process them, if you're going to have a hard time opening them up. So just slightly, like where you can almost unhook it if you just used your finger and your index finger. Your thumb and your index finger. So just slightly, but tight enough, just not tight. All right. So we have 4 beautiful jars. They all have rings on them. And so now we need to make sure that that lid seals to the jar. So what I'm going to do is that same water that we sterilized our jar. So we just brought it up to a boil for 10 minutes and then you put it down to a simmer. We're going to transfer these jars back to that water. So I'm going to transfer them back. And when you transfer them back, again, you just want to make sure that there's enough water to cover the tops of them. And mushrooms have a processing time of about 15 minutes. And so what I mean by that is we're going to put these guys back into that pot. We're going to bring the water up to a boil. And once the water starts boiling, you're going to start your time at 15 minutes. On average, most pickle things, like for instance, pint-sized jars of cucumbers, that processing time is usually about 10 minutes. So whatever recipe that you're using when it comes to the water bath canning process, make sure that you're looking at how long you actually need to process it ensuring that that lid seals to the jar, but also that you're being mindful of how long your product needs to kind of cook in a way. So these guys are going to go back into that pot. And I have enough water in here where they're all covered. Sometimes you may need to add water. So then I put those jars back in there, and then I'm going to bring that water up to where it's boiling. And once the jars start boiling, that's when I start my time at 15 minutes. So after 15 minutes, once your timer goes off, your jars should be good to go. You're going to notice that they're going to be extremely hot. And I always advise people to use some type, you can use your countertop, and maybe you want to put like a towel down and then place your jars on top. So this is a completed one, but we were pretending like we just took it out. So you would place your jars down, and then you would let them sit for 24 hours. Don't touch them. You can ooh and ah, but look with your eyes and not your hands. These jars are really hot. And so you just want to make sure that everything settles and everything comes to room temperature. So as you're kind of, doing your everyday things, you may hear the jars make like a click clack sound. And sometimes it'll be like pop, pop. And that's the sound of the lid sealing to the jar. So that's actually a really good sign. So 24 hours comes, and then you may come and check on them. And if you press down on the middle of the jar where the lid is, so I'll do it this way, press down where that lid is, and you don't get anything coming back, like this jar is completely flat. It's not resisting me. It's not making a clicking, clacking sound. That's how you know you have a really good seal. And so that jar is good to go. If you happen to click down on it and you hear some, like a click, 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 that just means that your seal, you don't have a good seal. So you can put it in the refrigerator. You have about a week or so to eat it. You can try it again. It's a lot more steps to try to reprocess that, which we won't go through. But for the most part, you should have a really good seal. Of course, this is a pickled item. These are not quick pickles. So this is a canned pickle. And so this can sit on your shelf in your storage for 4 to 6 weeks. And of course, the longer it sits, the better it's going to taste. But then after 4 weeks, if you can't handle it anymore, you want to try it, you can open it up and you can just start eating it. But definitely give yourself 4 weeks. If for some reason your seal just doesn't work out or something just goes wrong, you can put that item in the refrigerator, and I would eat it in about a week, and, try it again. But yeah, and then hopefully you'll have these, beautiful marinated mushrooms. So, yeah. So does anyone have any questions for me? I'm happy to answer questions or talk about other things you can pickle, or, anything you guys want to know.
So the lid it's the seal that closes the jar, not the lid. So that's why you don't want to tighten it. Yeah.
You're right. What size okay, so the ones that I was using, those are wide mouth, half pints. Those are really rare to find. So they have a wide mouth that looks like this, and they're shorter. This dude right here is a pint size jar, so that's about 16 ounces. You can use any size. I use the smaller ones if I know I'm going to give them away for gifts. And the bigger ones, like if it's, someone I know who really appreciates and loves that particular product. How does the process time differ for different vegetables and fruits? Yes. So, on average, I think what I mostly tell people is at least process for 10 minutes. Sometimes fruits, So for instance, pears may take longer to process because I make like a brandy pear. Vegetables tend to be on average 10 minutes. So that just depends on the vegetable. And, just making sure you look at the recipe. But on average, you're looking at a 10-minute for your processing time. I heard that, yes, there is a canning jar shortage. I am surprised that I have been able to continue through the pandemic. There's not only for the canning jars, the lids, and the rings. Luckily for me, my dad, who lives in Dallas, he has a job where he can travel the Metroplex, and he just stops in at any grocery store and sees if he can find jars for me. And so I have been so appreciative of him. So if you happen to go to Antonelli's and you buy some Sheena's Pickles that jar probably came from my dad. And I've talked to other people who are into pickling, and it is definitely a struggle. So if you have a friend or someone who's pickling and you have jars, give them to them, because it's been a real struggle to get jars, and they also have become more expensive. So pickling can be kind of expensive just because it's really hard to get the supplies. Mm-hmm. Yes, Callahan's has pickling supplies too. I love Callahan's, and they also have jars as well, usually on average. But yeah, they do. If you really get into pickling, or you're like, kind of intermediate pickler, one of my things that makes the canning process a little bit better is Ball Canning actually has a water bath canner. It's a huge dude. You can double stack jars. So that just allows me to do more in less time. I'm not having to keep rotating, jars. I can do, a good size and, pack all the products that I need. So, yeah. Yes, whoever said they're coming in fast, who uses vinegar to wipe the rims. Yeah, that works as well too. You just like, I remember I was teaching a class and I was like, oh, you wipe the rims with alcohol. No. Hot water. Like I said, my canner has water and vinegar in there. So when I wipe it down, you're getting a little bit of the vinegar, especially if you're working with oil. The first time I made these at Antonelli's, I made a complete mess. I had oil everywhere. It was coming from my gloves. Everything I touched had oil. We were slipping and sliding on the floor. So oil is it's a crazy substance to work with. But if you're making like vinegar-based pickles, you should be okay. Vinegar is pretty forgiving.
So Sheena, we missed a couple of questions. I know you were right, they're coming in. We had one question from Michelle about what you would like to eat these mushrooms with. So any suggestions for pairing our pickles?
Yeah, so I've heard so many different things about what people have used in the past. So some people do, you have a take on an avocado toast. Well, they do like a mushroom toast for their breakfast because it's super flavorful. People have added like just the enhance the rice dishes, just like a bed full of rice and then these mushrooms. There's so many things that you can do. My boyfriend and I, like if we have like a little nice cheese board, it really pairs well with some cheeses. So the sky's the limit with the mushrooms. I find that most people who love mushrooms put mushrooms on everything. And these are super flavorful. So I think you can do just about anything with them.
And there's one other question I'm sure everyone's thinking, what's your favorite thing to pickle?
Oh, that has changed over the years. Right now, I really like pickling green beans. I really like pickled green beans. And I love pickling fruit. So lately I've been pickling pears. I do a brandied pear. So that's using alcohol. So that's a totally different beast too. But those are my two favorite things. It used to be just pickling cucumbers, but the more I've done this, my favorite ones have changed.
Great. I think we had a question about the formula for pH levels.
So I don't have a good formula for pH levels because that is more for fermentation. We're not really doing this is not a fermented vegetable. But, one of the things that you should be mindful of as you're pickling, because pickling is basically submerging a fruit or a vegetable in vinegar. It is making sure that you're using the right vinegar, that you have to get that acidity at a certain level, which is why we talked about that 5% acidity. And then you can even do, like, I think it's a apple cider vinegar. And some of those come in at 5%. I really have found that it's really great if you want to kind of experiment with mixing vinegars, because it definitely gives you a different taste. For instance, when I make bread and butter pickles, I use 2 different types of vinegars. So just really being mindful of that acidity level. And also the great thing about pickling is you get to taste your product before you actually put it into the jar. So, like if you're tasting it, right, and you're like, ooh, the salt it's too much salt. You can add water or you can add more vinegar. So the thing with fermentation is, it's kind of a wild card, and you have a moment in time where you open up the jar, and maybe you get to taste it and see. So with pickling, you can kind of balance that stuff out before you even put it in the jar.
Cool. I think we're all caught up. The most recent question here from Ramona: how did you get into pickling?
I have always enjoyed pickles. I mean, especially pickled cucumbers. And I had a friend who I was working with, and she's like, you should just make your own pickles. And I was like, nah, I don't have time for that. But she ended up gifting me a little pickling kit. So she gave me some recipes, which I still use today. They've been modified, but I still use those recipes. And she gave me pickling salt in canning jars. And I used to work for the school district. So I had long summers and I had long, Christmas breaks. And that's when I started pickling, was I was taking that time off and just kind of teaching myself how to pickle. So, yeah.
Did you answer the question about nervous with oil for canning? It says, I've done a fair amount of canning, including tomato salsa, pickle cubes, jalapenos, and banana peppers, but I'm always nervous about anything with oil.
Yeah, I mean, oil is scary. I mean, it is one of those things, you can definitely start a grease fire. We had a little incident when we were working at Antonelli's where cutting board hit not our oil, but I can only imagine if it did, but it hit our cooking mushrooms. But oil can flake, I mean, it can get hot, it can rise, it can cause a fire. So when you're pickling anything in oil, just make sure you're being attentive. You don't want your oil too hot, right? You want it to kind of have a nice little simmer. It's controlled. You're not overpacking or overstuffing your pot. So, if you have mushrooms coming all the way up to the top and you're trying to cook that, that's just going to run over. And of course, the oil is going to run onto your stovetop. So it's just really, being mindful and managing how that oil is rising. But yes, I totally agree. It can be scary. It can be very dangerous. And so it's definitely one of those things that warrants your undivided attention when you're making it.
Did you answer the one, do you have a ratio for salt to liquid vinegar for different pickled items? Did you do that one?
No, I didn't do that one. So the salt is a weird one. On average, which is really great about pickling, I start off with equal parts water and equal parts vinegar, or equal parts 2 vinegars, or whatever you want. And then start off with about 1/4 cup of salt. Because usually in pickling, what you want to do when you kind of know the brine is ready is you want to make sure that the salt cooks off, right? You want to make sure it dissolves into the liquid. And at that point, taste it. If you, all my recipes, since they're I've tried them for so long, I kind of had to play around with the salt because if too much salt obviously makes it salty, But if you don't have enough salt, it kind of your vegetables kind of get soggy, or they don't keep that crunch. So one of the things that I always try to start with, so let's say it's I don't know, 4 cups of water and 4 cups of brine. I may start off with a 1/4 cup of pickling salt, or even 1/2 cup of pickling salt. That one is a hard one, because you're not going to know really how it's going to act until you've done it a couple of times. And it was kind of like a lot of trial and error for me. A lot of my original recipes called for table salt. Table salt will weaken your vegetables. I learned some things about cucumbers, like if you cut the ends off. So on the ends of cucumbers, there's an enzyme that actually is released. And so that enzyme can weaken the entire cucumber. So if you cut the ends off before you pickle and discard it, that helps. It keeps its crunch. So the salt is one of those things where it's usually, just to start, I would start off with a 1/4 cup to 1/2 cup, and definitely keep it equal parts water or equal parts your 2 vinegars. Yeah, I know the salt is big.
Do you use mineral salt or pink salt or any of that?
No, I just use pickling salt.
Oh, great. Any more questions out loud? So typed. Any other thing? Anybody want to add?
Hi, do you use grape leaves?
I have not used grape leaves. Does someone know where I can get grape leaves? That's the problem. I have always wanted to use grape leaves, but I don't know where to get them.
I used to.
I'm sorry, I was going to say I haven't said anything from now, but grape leaves, I've got them before at Specs,
Okay.
the liquor store.
Okay.
You can find them in the grape section sometimes, and I've also found them in Randall's. And if you ask, you might actually order them for you at HEB. And they come in a jar. Looks like it looks like an Italian a jar full of the Perrier, non-Perrier. Oh shoot, what are those things called?
Papers.
Thank you. Anyway, that's what it looks like. It's a tall, thin jar, and you can pull it out, and it like has, I don't know, 40 leaves in it that you have to.
Ooh. Okay, I'm gonna try that.
I've seen big long grapevines at the food forest.
Okay.
Thistle Beach Food Forest, like giant amounts of grape leaves just right on the fence.
Okay.
You just have to make sure they're tender enough that you can actually eat them.
Okay.
They usually use the young leaves when they put them up for food. Anyway, I'll go.
Or you could just plant a grape.
That's
Yeah.
true. That's true.
They're so easy.
And I see Ramona asked where are you going to send the written recipe. I've been in talk with Angel, but I'm happy to send the recipe to Mary, Danielle, I can send it.
Yeah, if you have her email, she's probably get
Okay.
it quickly too.
Yeah.
So, yeah. The Austin Organic Gardeners email address is
Okay.
it goes to several people. So
Perfect.
well, we so appreciate you coming out, and that's so exciting to see food cooking on the stove. And, because we used to kind of do more demonstrations in person, but we haven't much in a long time, and it's a good fall thing.
Yes. And I usually, when I do it in person, everyone goes home with their own jar. And so I love the in-person ones, but this is great too. It's our new reality, I guess.
See your kitchen.
Yeah.
Is that too late? Any suggestions on books to use for canning?
There's a website that I really like. Her name is Marissa, and her website is called Food in Jars. And she is fantastic. She walks you through the entire canning process. She does a lot of sponsored postings with Ball Canning. So she tries out a lot of their recipes as well. She has a Facebook. I know she's pretty active on Instagram, but it's called Food in Jars. And she has several cookbooks that I really like fruits and citrus and vegetables and everything in between. And I have found, is one of the most reliable sources. She's excellent. I love everything that she does. So yeah.
Beautiful, great resources. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We so enjoyed that. Yeah, so there's lots of information still in the chat about websites and links to Sheena and where to probably get your pickles. And yeah, that was really fun. And
Thank you guys.
I guess we'll sign off unless anyone else has anything else to add. Wonderful. Well, have a good evening, and thanks everyone for coming, and we will see you in January because December we take off.
Thanks, y'all.